Millionaire woman saves a single dad and his daughter on the road. What she did will shock you. Before we dive in, let's light up this comment section with hearts from every corner of the world. The rain came down like it had a personal grievance against the world. Not the kind of rain that taps politely on windows and makes city people reach for their umbrellas. This was the other kind. The kind that comes out of a sky gone the color of a bruise. The kind that hits asphalt so hard it bounces back up like it's trying to return to where it came from. The kind of rain that makes a man who has seen hard days look up at the clouds and feel, without quite admitting it, that the universe has been watching him and has chosen this moment to make a point. Ethan Cole was 35 years old, and he had learned a long time ago not to argue with weather. He had learned the same about judges, about banks, about the particular silence that fills a house when a woman decides she's done with the life she chose. You don't argue with things that have already made up their mind. You find another way. You keep moving. You do what has to be done. What had to be done right now was pull the truck off the highway and figure out why the engine had gone from a low cough to a dead silence without so much as a warning light to soften the blow. He guided the old Ford to the shoulder, the gravel pinging against the undercarriage, and let it roll to a stop in the mud. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, the rain hammering the roof so loud it made thought difficult. Then he looked to his right. Lily was asleep. She was curled up in her car seat with her cheek pressed against the padded side, her mouth slightly open, her small chest rising and falling with the absolute peace that only children can manage in the middle of catastrophe. She was 4 years old, and she trusted him completely. That was the heaviest thing Ethan Cole carried. Heavier than the toolbox in the truck bed. Heavier than the debt that followed him like a shadow. Heavier than the years of silence after the divorce was finalized on a Tuesday afternoon, while he sat in a plastic chair in a hallway that smelled like floor cleaner and bad decisions. She trusted him completely. And right now, in the middle of nowhere on a state highway in the first week of November, with a dead engine and no cell signal and the temperature dropping fast, he was going to have to earn that trust the hard way. He turned off the hazard lights. They'd drained the battery, and the battery was the only thing keeping the heater alive, and pulled his jacket from the back seat. He unzipped it and laid it over Lily without waking her. Then he sat back and thought. He was a mechanic. Had been for going on 15 years since he was 20, and his Uncle Ray handed him a socket wrench and told him the honest truth about life, that machines break down, and that the men who could fix them would never go hungry. He'd taken that to heart. He'd built something with his hands, a small shop in the town of Claremont, a reputation that was worth more than any sign on a wall. Men drove an hour to bring him their trucks because Ethan Cole diagnosed an engine the way a good doctor diagnoses a patient, listening, feeling, following the logic until the problem had nowhere left to hide. But diagnosing his own truck in the dark, in the rain with his 4-year-old daughter asleep 2 feet away, was a different proposition. He opened the door into the storm. The rain hit him like a wall. He ducked his head and moved around to the hood, his boot sinking into the soft shoulder, his shirt soaked through in the first 10 seconds. He popped the hood and propped it up and stared at the engine in the gray, flickering light of a highway where no other cars were passing. He put his hands on things he knew. He followed the logic. And after 4 minutes in the rain, he found it, a snapped serpentine belt, clean as a cut, coiled at the bottom of the engine bay like a dead snake. He lowered the hood. He did not have a spare belt. He had checked the truck before the drive. Oil, tires, brake fluid. But he had not checked the serpentine belt because it had been replaced 8 months ago and there had been no reason to suspect it. He was thorough, not psychic. He stood in the rain for a moment. He was on Highway 9, roughly 40 miles from the nearest town of any size. His phone showed no bars. It was 38 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. The truck would keep Lily warm for another hour, maybe 2, before the battery gave out and the heater died with it. He was not afraid. Fear was a luxury he had trained himself out of years ago. Somewhere between the 4th month of sleeping on a cot in a rented room while his wife lived in the house he'd paid for, and the morning he'd gotten up at 5 a.m. to make Lily's lunch before the custody exchange because he absolutely refused, to let his daughter feel the weight of what the adults in her life had done to each other. Fear got in the way of solutions, and solutions were all he had. He got back in the truck and pulled the door shut against the storm. Lily stirred. Her eyes opened. Those dark eyes that had come from his side of the family, his mother's eyes, patient and deep and capable of seeing right through a person. She looked at him with the particular directness of children who have not yet learned to pretend. "Are we there, Daddy?" "Not yet, baby girl." He kept his voice even. "The truck needs to rest for a little while." She considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things. Then she said, "Is it sick?" "A little bit." "Can you fix it?" He looked at his daughter. He thought about everything that word meant, fix. He had been trying to fix things his whole life. Some of them he had managed. Some of them were beyond the reach of any wrench or will. But the look in her eyes right now wasn't a question about trucks. It was something older than that. It was the question children ask when they are watching their parents stand between them and the dark. And they need to know the answer is yes. "I'm working on it," he said. She nodded and pulled his jacket tighter around her small shoulders. And that small gesture, the trust in it, the unconscious certainty that his jacket would be enough, hit him somewhere behind the sternum where no amount of discipline could armor a man against his own child. He turned back to the highway. The rain had not let up. If anything, it was coming harder now, the kind of intensity that suggests the storm has found its stride and intends to stay for a while. The highway was empty in both directions. He'd passed the last gas station 22 miles back, and there was nothing visible ahead except the wet black ribbon of asphalt disappearing into darkness. He was calculating. He was always calculating how long the battery would hold. Whether walking for help was viable, it wasn't, not with Lily. Whether the hazards were worth the battery cost for the visibility they provided. He was running numbers and contingencies with the focused quiet of a man who has learned that panic is just wasted energy dressed up as feeling. That was when the lights appeared. At first it was just a brightness in the rearview mirror too far away to identify. Then it resolved into headlights, 2 of them, high and wide, the signature of something large, an SUV, moving fast but slowing, pulling off the highway behind him. Ethan watched the lights in his mirror without moving. He was not a suspicious man by nature, but he had been a man alone with his daughter on empty roads before, and he knew that the world did not always send help when you needed it. Sometimes it sent complications. He reached quietly to the center console and rested his hand there, not touching anything, just resting. The SUV stopped. The headlights went to parking mode, and then the driver's door opened. What got out of that black SUV was not what Ethan Cole had expected. She was tall, or seemed tall. It was the way she moved, with a straightness that most people lose somewhere in childhood and never recover. She was wearing a coat that cost more than his monthly rent, her blonde hair darkening in the rain, and she was walking toward his truck with the focused calm of someone who has decided to do a thing and is not going to think too hard about it before the doing is done. She came to his window. He lowered it. She looked at him for a moment, not assessing exactly, not the way people look at a man on the side of the road when they're deciding whether he's a threat. She looked at him the way you look at something that surprises you. Then she looked past him to Lily, wrapped in his jacket, watching the strange woman with the bright, unfiltered curiosity of a 4-year-old. "Your engine?" the woman said. "Serpentine belt." She nodded once. "I have room for both of you. There's a motel in Harwick. 40 minutes. Ethan looked at her. He took the measure of a person quickly. It was a skill built over years of working with strangers. Reading the difference between a man telling him the truth about his car and a man telling him what he wanted to hear. What he read in this woman was not performance. It was discomfort, maybe. The discomfort of someone doing something that did not come naturally, but underneath it something that looked a great deal like the simple, stubborn decision to not drive past a man and his child in a storm. "Ethan Cole," he said. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. "Victoria Hargrove." He turned to his daughter. "Lily, we're going to ride with this lady for a while." Lily looked at Victoria with those deep, patient eyes. Then she said, with the gravity of someone rendering a verdict, "Her coat is wet. Victoria Hargrove blinked, and for the first time since she'd gotten out of her SUV, something behind her eyes changed. A crack in something, small and almost invisible, like the first fissure in a dam that doesn't know yet what it's about to become. "Yes," she said, "it is." Ethan Cole unbuckled his daughter, tucked his jacket around her like armor, and stepped out into the storm to gather what he'd need. He did not take much. He had learned to travel light, a bag with Lily's things, his wallet, his phone, the small leather case that held a photograph of his parents on their wedding day, and a folded piece of paper with a set of coordinates that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know the story behind them. He locked the truck. He didn't know when he'd get back to it. He walked toward the black SUV with his daughter in his arms, her face tucked against his neck, her small hand gripping the collar of his shirt. None of them knew yet what the next 40 minutes would begin. But somewhere on that dark highway, in the space between a broken-down truck and a black SUV idling in the rain, something was already in motion that none of the three of them had chosen, and none of them would be able to stop. There is a particular kind of silence that exists inside a moving vehicle between two people who do not know each other. It is not the comfortable silence of old friends who have run out of things to say and don't mind. It is not the hostile silence of people who have said too much. It is the silence of two strangers sitting close together in a small space, each aware of the other's breathing, each choosing their words with the care of a man crossing ice, testing each step before committing weight to it. Ethan sat in the passenger seat of Victoria Hargrove's SUV and looked straight ahead at the rain-blurred highway. Lily was in the back seat, buckled into a makeshift arrangement with the seatbelt, his jacket still wrapped around her, already beginning to drift back toward sleep with the preternatural ease of children, who decide the present circumstances are someone else's problem. The interior of the SUV smelled of something expensive, leather and some kind of cedar and citrus combination that suggested money spent on things Ethan had never thought to spend money on. The vehicle itself was the kind of thing that made a mechanic involuntarily catalog its specs. Full-size luxury SUV, current model year, the kind of tires that cost more than his monthly grocery bill. He noted these things the way he noted everything mechanical, not with envy exactly, but with the professional appreciation of a man who understood what things cost and what they were worth, and knew that those two numbers were not always the same. "You don't have to explain yourself," Victoria said. She was watching the road, her hands at 10 and 2, her posture impeccable. "I'm not looking for a story." "I wasn't offering one," Ethan said. A beat of silence. "The belt just snapped?" she asked. 8 months old, could have been a manufacturing defect. Could have been the cold. Happens. You knew immediately what it was. That's my job." She glanced at him, just for a second, the way you check a mirror rather than a person, and then returned her eyes to the road. "Mechanic. Shop owner. Claremont." She didn't say anything to that. He wasn't sure what he expected her to say. He hadn't told her for her benefit. He'd told her because he was a man who believed in being clear about what he was. He had never been ashamed of it. He had grown up in a world that told men with grease under their nails that they were less than men with clean hands and soft handshakes, and he had taken that message, considered it carefully, and decided it was wrong. Work was work. Dignity was separate. A man could lose his income and keep his dignity. A man could lose his house, his marriage, his truck on a county highway, and still be standing in the exact same place inside himself, if he had built that place correctly from the beginning. His father had taught him that. Not in words. In the way he'd watched him walk into a room. "How old is she?" Victoria asked. He realized she meant Lily. 4. She'll be 5 in March. "Does she travel with you often?" "Every other week." He kept his voice neutral, but something shifted behind his ribs when he said it. Every other week. As if his daughter was a magazine subscription. Something he received on a schedule. Something parceled out in measured doses by a court order that had taken him 18 months and every dollar he could scrape together to negotiate into something resembling fairness. Every other week. Plus alternating holidays. That was the official language of how much of his daughter's life belonged to him. The unofficial language, the one he lived in, the one that woke him up at 3 in the morning to lie in the dark and listen to the silence where her breathing used to be, was something else entirely. Victoria did not ask anything further about that. He was grateful for it. He looked out the window at the rain-streaked dark. They were moving through country he knew in the daylight, but not like this. The fields flat and black on both sides of the highway, the occasional farmhouse light floating past like a signal from another world. He had driven this route more times than he could count, back and forth between Claremont and the town of Weston, where his ex-wife had relocated after the divorce, where Lily lived in a house he had never been inside, in a room decorated in a style chosen by people who weren't him. He was not a bitter man. Or rather, he had made a sustained and deliberate choice not to be, because bitterness was a kind of acid, and he had watched it eat through enough other men to know what it left behind. His friend Marcus, who had gone through something similar, who had spent 3 years so focused on what had been taken from him that he'd barely noticed what he still had. Men who turned inward and sour and small. He had refused that. He had looked at Lily and refused it. But there were nights. There were nights when the shop was quiet and the last invoice was filed, and the dinner dishes were done, and there was nothing left to do, nothing left to maintain or fix or attend to. And the silence of a house meant for more people than currently occupied it settled over him like water finding its level. Those nights had their own weight. He didn't talk about them. There was no one particular to talk to about them. You just waited them out, the way you wait out a storm. Patient, still certain that it would pass and that you would be standing when it did. "Where are you headed?" Victoria asked. "Weston, dropping Lily off Sunday evening." "Tonight's Friday." "Yes. So you have her until Sunday." "Yes." She nodded slowly, as if filing this information somewhere. He watched her profile for a moment, the clean line of her jaw, the way she held herself even now. Two strangers in a car in the rain with a composure that felt less like coldness than like armor. He recognized armor. He wore his own. He just wore it differently. "From the back seat," Lily said, in the dreamy voice of someone surfacing from sleep without quite arriving. "Daddy, are the stars still there when it rains?" Both adults were quiet for a second. "They're still there," Ethan said. "The clouds are just visiting." A pause. Then Lily, apparently satisfied, descended back into sleep. Victoria's hands tightened on the wheel for just a moment. So brief he might have imagined it. But he hadn't. He'd been watching the way he always watched, not intrusively, just attentively. The way you listen to an engine for the sound that tells you what the machine is actually doing underneath its surface performance. What he heard, in that brief tightening, was something that had nothing to do with driving. They rode in silence for another few miles. The rain began to ease, not stopping but softening into the kind of steady gray drizzle that could last for days. The headlights caught the sign for Harwick, 15 miles ahead. Ethan was thinking about logistics, getting a room, finding a parts supplier who could have a belt to him by morning, whether he could borrow a truck or arrange a ride to get back to his Ford before road service impounded it. His mind moved through the problem with the practiced efficiency of a man who had learned to solve things with limited resources. He had very little money. The shop had been slow in October, slow in the particular way that small businesses get slow when large expenses arrive without warning. The water heater at the shop had gone out. A piece of diagnostic equipment had needed replacing. He had a few $100s in his personal account, enough for a motel room and the belt, if the belt was a standard part, and not a special order. Not enough for complications. He did not say any of this. He had not asked her for help beyond the ride, and he did not intend to. The ride had been freely offered, and he had accepted it with a nod and a straightforward gratitude that did not diminish him to offer. That was the line. He knew where it was. His grandfather, who had worked 31 years on an assembly line in Michigan and come home every evening smelling of metal and oil and something indefinable that his grandmother had once described simply as honesty, had told him once, "There is no shame in needing help. The shame only comes in pretending you don't, or in taking more than was offered. Know what you need. Accept what's given. Leave the rest alone." He had tried to live by that. He had not always succeeded, but he had tried. The lights of Harwick began to appear ahead, smeared by rain into orange halos. a water tower, a gas station, the kind of main street that exists everywhere in the rural Midwest. A few blocks of storefronts, half of them occupied, half of them holding on, none of them pretending to be anything other than what they were. There's a motel on Route 9 just north of town, Victoria said. The Harwick Inn, it's clean. I'll find something, Ethan said. She looked at him for the first time since they'd started driving. Not the quick mirror check of the highway, but actually looked, her eyes leaving the road long enough to take a full measure of him. He held that look without flinching and without performing anything. He was what he was. I know you will, she said, and in her voice was something he hadn't heard there before, not warmth exactly, but the first cousin of it. The thing that comes just before warmth, when a person's defenses are still up but they've begun to wonder whether the defenses are necessary. From the back seat, Lily had fully woken and was looking out the window at the wet town sliding past, her nose nearly touching the glass. Daddy, she said, that diner has lights. He followed her gaze. The Harwick Diner, old neon sign in the window, a couple of cars in the lot. It does. I'm hungry. He looked at the clock on the dash. 8:47. She hadn't eaten since the gas station at 4, where he'd gotten her a peanut butter sandwich from the cooler because the hot food looked uncertain. A 4-year-old's patience for hunger is not long, and he had already pushed the edge of it. He looked at the money in his account in his head. We'll get something, he said. I know a better option, Victoria said quietly. She said it in a way that left room for him to decline, not like a woman used to getting what she wanted, but like someone who had considered her words before releasing them. I was stopping for dinner anyway, let me. He was quiet for a moment. The ride was already more than enough, he said. Maybe. She turned into the diner parking lot. But she's 4 years old and she's hungry, and I'm going in regardless. He looked at his daughter's face in the rearview mirror, bright-eyed, expectant, the hunger forgotten in the interest of the lit-up diner windows. He looked at the woman beside him who had stopped her expensive SUV in the rain for no reason she had yet explained and was not explaining now. He thought about his grandfather. Accept what's given. Okay, he said. Thank you. Victoria put the SUV in park. She sat for just a moment before opening her door. And in that moment her profile was very still, and he thought, though he could not have said why, that she was as surprised by herself as he was by her. The Harwick Diner was the kind of place that had been feeding people for 40 years, without ever once trying to be something other than what it was. Formica countertops worn smooth in the spots where 10,000 elbows had rested. Vinyl booth seats patched with duct tape in 2 places and not patched in a third. A pie case near the register with 3 kinds of pie, 2 of them running low. Country music from a speaker above the kitchen window. Low enough not to intrude. Present enough to fill the silence between strangers. The kind of place where the coffee was strong, and the portions were honest, and nobody looked up for too long when someone new came through the door. They came through the door. The waitress, a woman of about 60, hair silver and pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose, looked up from her order pad and assessed them in the efficient way of someone who has seen every combination of people that life can produce. A tall man in a wet shirt carrying a 4-year-old girl with a miniature jacket draped over her shoulders. A blonde woman behind them, coat expensive, expression careful, moving like someone who had not been in a place like this in a long time and was recalibrating. Anywhere you like, honey, the waitress said to Lily. Lily pointed immediately to the booth by the window with the focus of a general choosing terrain. They settled. Lily sat beside Ethan, immediately engaged with the laminated menu she could not read but treated with complete seriousness, turning it this way and that, as if the pictures would reveal more if approached from different angles. Victoria sat across from them, her coat folded on the seat beside her, and looked at the menu with the particular blankness of someone for whom a menu in a diner is an unusual object. The grilled cheese is going to be her order, Ethan told the waitress. She'll think about it for 5 minutes and end up there. I might get the burger, Lily said with great dignity. You might, he agreed. 3 minutes later, she ordered the grilled cheese. He ordered a coffee and a bowl of chili. Victoria ordered, after a longer pause than Ethan would have expected, a patty melt, and a coffee. She said it like she was ordering from a menu she didn't quite trust, but she said it. And the waitress wrote it down without ceremony. When the waitress left, Lily looked across the table at Victoria with the unguarded directness that was becoming, Ethan was realizing, her characteristic mode with new people. "Are you a princess?" Lily asked. Victoria blinked. Whatever response she had prepared for the first words out of this child's mouth, it hadn't been that. "No," she said. "You look like one." Lily considered her. "The ones in the books have hair like yours." "In the books they have better circumstances," Victoria said. Lily didn't fully understand this, but she accepted it with the flexibility of children who can absorb ambiguous statements without needing to resolve them. "I like your earrings," she said. "Thank you." "Daddy doesn't wear earrings." "I don't," Ethan confirmed. "Why not?" "I work with my hands. They'd get caught on things." Lily accepted this with a nod, filed it away, and turned back to the window where the rain was putting on a performance against the glass. She pressed her small palm flat against it and watched the rain run around her handprint. Ethan watched her for a moment. He could feel Victoria watching too. Not Lily exactly, but the space between them, the unremarkable domestic intimacy of a father and his daughter in a booth at the end of a hard day. He was used to being watched in that space. People watched single fathers with Lily the way they watched something that confused their expectations, with a mix of approval and uncertainty, as if they wanted to say something but couldn't find the right word. He brought his eyes back to Victoria. "You didn't have to do any of this," he said. Not as an accusation, just as a fact he wanted on the table. "No," she agreed. "Most people drive past." "I know. Why didn't you?" She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. The mug was thick ceramic, the kind that holds heat. She seemed to find something useful in that, the heat in her palms. "I saw her in the window," she said, your jacket wrapped around her. She was looking out at the rain. A pause. "I don't know. It seemed wrong to drive past that." He looked at her. There was no performance in what she'd said, no charity performed for an audience. She seemed, if anything, slightly uncomfortable with the admission, as if caring about something she'd seen through a rain-streaked car window was a deviation from some personal standard she was still figuring out how to account for. "Well," he said, "thank you." She looked at him then, really looked the way she had in the SUV but longer this time, as if the diner light made it possible to look without giving too much away. He held it. He had nothing to hide, which made holding a direct look easy. He had found over the years that people who couldn't hold his eyes were usually carrying something that made honesty expensive. Victoria Hargrove's eyes did not waver, but they changed. Slowly, over the seconds that passed between them, something in them shifted. The careful management of expression that she wore like a second coat beginning to settle differently, as if the weight of it had become, just for a moment, slightly more than she wanted to carry. Then Lily said, "The grilled cheese is coming," with the certainty of prophecy, and the waitress appeared from the kitchen with a tray, and the moment broke apart like all moments do. The food was good, simple, honest, exactly what it was supposed to be. Lily ate her grilled cheese with the methodical dedication she brought to meals she had decided were acceptable. Ethan ate his chili and watched his daughter and felt, as he always felt when he was watching her across a table, the particular gratitude that has no clean word in English. The feeling of having been given something you know you did not earn and cannot pay back, only receive. Victoria ate her patty melt. She ate it slowly at first, in the careful way of someone eating for nutrition rather than pleasure. And then something changed, and she ate it like she was actually tasting it. And she looked up once with an expression that was nearly surprised, as if the food had gone and done something unexpected. "Good?" he asked. "It's very good," she said, and sounded slightly annoyed by the fact. He felt the corner of his mouth move. She saw it. Her chin came up slightly, not defensively, but with the reflex of a person who is not used to being observed allowing it. "You find that amusing," she said. "I find it honest," he said. "Is there a difference?" "Usually." She looked at him for a moment, and he thought he saw, just for a moment, just at the very edge of her expression, the thing that precedes a smile in people who have forgotten how to produce one without thinking about it first. Lily, who had finished her grilled cheese and was now using a fork to move the small pile of kettle chips around her plate in a pattern that had some internal logic invisible to adults, looked up and said, out of nowhere, "My daddy used to be in the army." The word used to landed in the air between them. Victoria looked at Ethan. He looked at his daughter with the unhurried patience of a man who has heard a thing said about himself and is deciding how to respond to it in front of another person. "Where did you hear that?" he asked Lily. "Grandma," Lily said. "Grandma talks too much," he said, but without edge. Lily nodded, apparently in agreement on this point. Victoria was still looking at him. He could feel it. He kept his eyes on his coffee cup for a moment, turned it in his hands. "Long time ago," he said, and his voice had a quality that most people who knew him recognized, the deliberate flatness of a man stepping over a subject, not avoiding it, just choosing not to open that particular door, in this particular room, at this particular time. She did not push. He noted that. She received the information and set it aside and returned to her food with the discretion of someone who understands that some things are not offered because they're not yet ready to be received. He was aware that this said something about her. Outside, the rain had settled into the steady gray drizzle it had been threatening to become. Through the diner window, the wet main street of Harwick reflected the orange light of the street lamps in long orange ripples on the pavement. A single car moved slowly through it. Its headlights diffused. The pie case near the register lost one of its 3 pies to a man in a barn coat who took it to go without ceremony. This was the ordinary world. This was the world he lived in, not Victoria Hargrove's world, with its black SUVs and cedar and citrus interiors and coats that cost a working man's monthly rent. His world was here. The diner, the rain, the child with her fork and her chips, the coffee that was too strong and exactly right. He thought about the motel room he still needed to find. He thought about his truck on the highway shoulder, ticking cold in the rain. He thought about the call he'd need to make in the morning to the parts supplier in Cedar Falls about the belt, and whether Marcus might be willing to drive out Sunday to bring him a loaner. He was building his plan. He was always building his plan. Forward motion, step by step, with whatever was available. He had learned that in the army. He had learned it the way men learn things when the lessons are serious and the cost of not learning is severe. He had been good at it. He had been better than good, in ways that were on paper somewhere in the Department of Defense's files, in ways that the men he served with still occasionally referenced when they talked about that particular deployment, in that particular country, in those particular 8 months that Ethan Cole had put somewhere behind him and rarely discussed. His grandmother, God rest her, had kept the articles. She had put them in a scrapbook that now sat in a box in his closet, under the winter coats, because he didn't know what else to do with it, and he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. Lily had never seen it. He didn't know when the right time was for that conversation, or if there was one. Victoria was watching him again, not the checking-in glance of the highway or the cautious assessment of the diner's first minutes. Something quieter. The kind of looking that happens when a person has stopped performing their own composure and is just present, just there, without the overhead cost of managing it. He met her eyes. Something moved between them in that moment that neither of them would have been able to name yet. Not attraction exactly, or not only that, something more like recognition, the particular jolt of seeing something familiar in a face you have never seen before. The sense of standing at the edge of a country you did not know existed, and finding that the landscape looks, impossibly, like somewhere you have been. "Daddy," Lily said. He turned to his daughter. She had stopped moving the chips with her fork. She was looking up at him with an expression he knew well, the look she got when she had been turning something over in her mind, and had finally arrived at what she wanted to say. "I like her," Lily said with a nod toward Victoria. The directness of it was absolute, the kind of verdict only children can render. Not cruel, not calculated, just the plain truth of what was true for her in this moment. Ethan looked at his daughter. He looked at the woman across the table who was sitting very still with both hands around her coffee cup. her expression doing something complicated that she was not quite managing to control. "I know," he said quietly. And in the quiet of the Harwick diner, with the rain still falling outside, and the pie case down to its last two, and the country music asking no one in particular about roads and leaving and coming home again, the three of them sat in a circle of diner light that was, in its own unremarkable way, exactly warm enough. Ethan Cole did not know what morning would bring. He did not know how many other meals there would be in places like this, how many more rainstorms, how many more roads. He did not know what the woman across the table was running from or toward, or whether the thing he had just felt in his chest when she finally stopped managing her expression would amount to anything at all. What he knew was this: his daughter trusted him, the coffee was hot, and somewhere in the last hour, in the wet dark of Highway 9, something had found the three of them that none of them had gone looking for. That was enough for tonight. He would deal with the rest of it when the sun came up. There is a specific hour of the night, somewhere between midnight and the first gray suggestion of morning, that belongs entirely to men who carry things they cannot put down. Not the restless hour of the young who lie awake because life is too big and too loud and won't stop moving. This is a different hour, quieter, more settled. The hour of men who have already learned what the world is capable of doing to a person, and who have made their peace with most of it, and who lie in the dark not with anxiety but with a kind of sober, patient reckoning, turning the ledger over in their hands and looking at it with clear eyes. Ethan Cole was awake in that hour. He was lying on top of the covers of the single bed in room 7 of the Harwick Inn, a room that was clean, as Victoria had promised, and small and anonymous in the way that rooms are when they've held too many temporary people to hold on to anyone's particular shape. Lily was asleep in the other bed 3 feet away, her breathing slow and even and completely untroubled. She had fallen asleep in the SUV on the drive from the diner, and he'd carried her in without waking her, and she had not stirred since. He was listening to that breathing. He did it most nights when she was with him. Lay in the dark and listened to her breathe. Not from worry, but from a need that he could not fully explain and did not try to. It was something about the proof of it, the sound of her being there, being real, being alive and warm and present in the world. After years of every other week and holiday schedules and custody exchanges in parking lots, he had learned not to take the sound of his daughter's breathing for granted. He thought about the evening. He turned it over the way he turned things over, methodically, without drama, following the sequence of it. Victoria Hargrove. He had looked her up on his phone after they'd checked in, not from suspicion but from the simple honesty of wanting to know who she was before he decided what to make of her. The name had returned results immediately. Hargrove Capital. Old family money, the kind that had been old money for long enough that it had begun to resemble something almost natural, as if wealth of that age and magnitude was less a thing people had than a thing people were. Her father was Edmund Hargrove, whose name appeared regularly in the financial press in connection with real estate and private equity, and the kind of influence that does not advertise itself. Victoria's name appeared less. She was on the board of 2 companies and the foundation of a 3rd. There were a handful of photographs, charity events, ribbon cuttings, one profile piece from a financial magazine 2 years ago in which the writer had described her, with the particular approval of people who confuse emotional distance with strength, as formidable, self-contained, and impossible to read. The kind of language that means a woman has learned to protect herself and has gotten very good at it. He had set the phone face down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling. He knew something about protection, about building the kind of interior structure that keeps a man standing when the things around him come apart. He had built his over years, with the deliberateness of someone who has watched what happens to men who don't, who has seen the wreckage that accumulates around a person who lets the world reach all the way in without any architecture to absorb the impact. But there was a difference between protection and isolation, between a man who keeps himself steady so he can be present for the people who need him, and a man, or a woman, who keeps people at a distance because the cost of letting them close has already proven too high. He had seen both. He had been on the edge of the second one. In the years right after the divorce, when the shop had been the only thing that gave the days their shape, and Lily's visits were the only thing that gave them their meaning. He had come back from that edge. Slowly, with no fanfare, by choosing each morning to be the kind of man his daughter could look at without confusion. He thought about Lily saying, with the clean certainty of 4 years old, "I like her." He thought about the expression on Victoria Hargrove's face when she'd heard it. She had not smiled. Not exactly. But something in her had shifted. Some load-bearing piece of the composure she maintained had taken on. Just briefly, the quality of something that wanted very much to be set down. He had seen that in a person's face before. He knew what it meant. It meant that somewhere underneath the management and the careful distance, there was a person who had not entirely forgotten what it felt like to be reached. He didn't know what to do with that information. He filed it. He was good at filing things until they were needed. He lay in the dark and listened to his daughter breathe and thought about the morning. In the morning, he needed to call Marcus about the truck. He needed to find out whether the parts supplier in Cedar Falls could get a serpentine belt to Harwick by afternoon. He needed to get Lily breakfast and keep her occupied while he sorted the logistics. And he needed to do all of this on a Saturday in a town he didn't know with limited funds and no vehicle. He had dealt with harder mornings. He thought about where he was going after Harwick. Not geographically, and he knew the geography. He meant in the larger sense. The question that sat at the back of his mind most days, quiet but present. The way a low-grade engine noise sits under the normal operation of a car, audible to the person who knows to listen for it even when everyone else in the vehicle is oblivious. Where was he going, What was the shape of the life he was building, in the years before Lily was old enough not to need him every day? He was not a man who spiraled on these questions. He asked them the way you ask a question you know you can't answer yet, and then you set them aside and go back to the work. But they were there. 35 years old, shop doing well enough, daughter healthy, loved, clear-eyed, a house that was technically his home but functioned more as a base of operations, no one to tell about the days that mattered, no one to call when something happened that was too good or too heavy to carry alone. That last one he didn't let himself dwell on, because the dwelling did no one any good. He rolled onto his side and looked at Lily. In the thin light coming under the door, her face was a collection of shadows and peace. His father's nose, his mother's forehead, her own particular expression of bottomless certainty. Even in sleep, as if the world made complete sense to her and always would. He hoped that would last. He knew it wouldn't, entirely. The world had a way of complicating itself for children as they grew, of adding weight and shadow to things that had once seemed simple. But he intended to be standing between her and the worst of it for as long as he possibly could. Not to shield her from everything, that was its own kind of harm, but to be the fixed point, the constant, the thing she could navigate by. That was the job. That had always been the job. He had not come to it naturally, despite what Lily seemed to think. He had learned it, the way he had learned everything that mattered, through paying attention and making mistakes and being honest about which was which, and showing up the next day and trying again. He thought about his father. Raymond Cole had been the most naturally reliable man Ethan had ever known. Not remarkable, not famous, not the kind of man whose name appeared anywhere. He had worked at the same plant for 27 years, come home at the same time each evening, eaten dinner at the same table with the same people in the same chairs. He had coached his son's Little League team for 5 years, not because he'd had any particular talent for it, but because Ethan had wanted to play and someone needed to coach. He had sat in the front row of Ethan's high school graduation and cried without making any effort to stop, because he believed that the things that warranted crying also warranted being seen to cry. He had died of a heart attack at 61, in the kitchen of the house where Ethan had grown up, while the coffee was brewing. That was 12 years ago. Ethan still reached for the phone sometimes to call him when something happened he wanted to talk through. The reaching was involuntary. He had come to understand that it would never entirely stop, and that this was not a problem to be solved, but simply a feature of loving someone and losing them. The habit of needing them persisting beyond the possibility of being answered. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep immediately. The night had its own momentum, and he let it run a while longer, turning things over, setting things down, filing what needed to be filed. Then the breathing of his daughter reached some deeper register in him, the one that existed below thought, and the plans and the questions and the woman with the careful eyes all receded. And he slept. Morning came gray and cold, the rain overnight having spent itself and left the sky the color of old concrete. Lily was up at 6:15 with the implacable biology of children who believe in mornings, sitting upright in her bed with her hair at maximum disorder, demanding pancakes with a cheerfulness that Ethan found, as he almost always found it, inexplicably restoring. He called Marcus while Lily ate her pancakes at the motel's small breakfast counter. Marcus, who was 51 and had known Ethan since the army, answered on the second ring with the unhurried calm of a man who had decided long ago that very little in civilian life warranted genuine alarm. "I heard part of that," Marcus said when Ethan had finished explaining. "Which part is the one where you need something from me?" "Belt, parts supplier in Cedar Falls, and a ride to the truck. Today, if you can." A pause. He could hear Marcus breathing, and in the background the sound of his kitchen, a television, a coffee maker, the particular domestic ambiance of a Saturday morning. Marcus had a wife, 2 grown sons, a house with a yard. He had built the life that the army had given him time and distance to understand he wanted, and he had built it carefully and well. "You know," Marcus said, "there are men who would call AAA. I'm aware, but you're not one of those men. I'm calling you at 6:30 on a Saturday." "Marcus." "Yes, you are." A sound that might have been a laugh. "I'll be there by noon." Ethan thanked him and hung up. He looked at his daughter, who had maple syrup on her chin and was looking out the window at the gray Saturday morning with the absorption of someone for whom gray Saturday mornings are entirely satisfactory. He thought about Victoria Hargrove, who had left them at the motel entrance the previous night with a nod and a brief exchange of numbers. Practical, no ceremony, and driven off into the rain. He thought about calling her. He had no particular reason to. He had every practical reason not to. He was a mechanic from a small town with a broken-down truck and a custody schedule, and the kind of life that existed about as far as possible from whatever world Victoria Hargrove actually inhabited. He did not call her, but he kept her number, and he found in the keeping of it the same honesty he tried to apply to everything, the simple admission that some things you hold on to not because you know what to do with them, but because throwing them away feels like a lie. He drank his coffee. He watched his daughter. Outside, the clouds were beginning to separate, and between them, in the high pale gaps, the first weak light of a November morning was making its way through. Not warmth yet, not spring, just light, the kind that comes after storms, provisional and clean, suggesting nothing except that the night had passed and the morning had arrived, and a man with his eyes open could see, at least what was directly in front of him. That was enough to work with. It always had been. She called him at 10:17. He was in the motel parking lot, Lily beside him drawing patterns in the frost on the side of the Ford that Marcus had driven over. Marcus, who had arrived 2 hours early and not mentioned it, who had produced the right serpentine belt from the back of his truck with the air of a man who merely happened to have it, which both of them knew was not true. The belt was installed. The engine had turned over on the first try. The truck was alive again, sitting in the gray November light with the quiet solidity of things that have been properly repaired. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, the number she'd given him with the name he'd put next to it, Victoria H. He picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Cole." Her voice was the same as it had been the night before, controlled even, the voice of a person who chooses every word before releasing it. But underneath it, something. A quality he recognized from the diner from the moment Lily had rendered her verdict. The quality of someone recalibrating. "Ethan," he said, "you don't have to call me Mr. Cole." A pause. "Ethan, I wanted to. I have something I need to tell you." He waited. "I know who you are," she said. "I mean, I looked you up this morning. I know that's—" A pause that felt for a woman who appeared to experience very little difficulty with words, genuinely uncomfortable. "I know it might seem forward. I looked you up last night," he said. Another pause. Briefer this time. Then we're even. What did you find? He asked, though he thought he knew. Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole, she said. 3rd Special Forces Group, Kandahar Province, 2014. Her voice had changed slightly, not softer but more careful, the way a person gets careful when they are saying something they want to say correctly. I found the article from the Claremont Gazette, and the commendation, and the AP piece. He was quiet. In the parking lot, Lily was tracing letters in the frost. She had recently learned to write her name and exercised this skill on every available surface. Marcus was leaning against his truck drinking coffee from a thermos, giving Ethan space without being asked. Because that was Marcus. That was a long time ago, Ethan said. 11 years is not that long. Feels long. 3 soldiers, she said quietly. You pulled 3 soldiers out of a burning vehicle under active fire, and then went back for the 4th. He didn't answer. The 4th one didn't make it, she continued. I read that too. I read the full account. The name formed itself in his mind with the immediacy that it always did, the way it always would, regardless of how many years accumulated between the present moment and that afternoon in Kandahar. A dirt road, a column of smoke, a sound he had never been able to fully describe to anyone who hadn't been there. Daniel Reyes, 24 years old, from San Antonio, had a photograph of his daughter in his breast pocket, a photograph that was still there when they found him, that had survived things the man it was meant for had not. Ethan had been to San Antonio once, 3 years after, to meet the daughter, She had been 6. She had her father's eyes and her mother's chin, and she had looked at Ethan with the same direct attention Lily brought to everything, and she had said very simply, My mom says you tried. He had not trusted his voice to respond to that. He had nodded, and the girl's mother had put her hand on his arm for a moment. And then they had all sat in the kitchen and had coffee, and nobody had said anything of particular significance, and somehow that had been exactly right. I didn't tell you because it's not something I lead with, Ethan said. His voice was even. It's not a thing I carry around for people to look at. I know, Victoria said. I could tell that last night. Your daughter mentioned it and you stepped over it, and I understood that you were stepping over it intentionally. A pause. I'm not bringing it up because I think it changes anything. I'm bringing it up because... She stopped. He waited. Because I woke up this morning and I was thinking about last night. And I was thinking about the way you sat in that diner, and I realized I had formed an impression of you that I thought was complete. And then I found out there was an entire dimension of you that I hadn't accounted for, and I... She stopped again. He could hear her choosing. I wanted you to know that I know. Because it felt dishonest not to say so. He absorbed this. He turned it over. It was, he decided, one of the more unusual phone calls he had received in recent years, and it was unusual in a way that he found, against his better judgment, entirely compelling. Okay, he said, okay. You know, I know you know. You... Now we've both said it. A pause. How are you this morning? A silence. Then quietly, something that was almost a laugh. Not performed, not social, but the surprised exhale of a person who was not expecting the conversation to go in this direction. I'm fine, she said. I'm at a coffee shop in Harwick. I didn't drive back last night. He looked up. The Harwick diner was 3 blocks from the motel. He could see the sign from where he was standing. Why didn't you drive back? He asked. Another pause. Longer. The kind of pause that contains a real answer being considered against a safe answer, and the person not yet being sure which one to give. I didn't want to, she said finally. He stood in the parking lot with the phone against his ear and the November air cold against his face, and his daughter writing her name in frost behind him, and Marcus drinking coffee with the elaborate patience of a man who is absolutely paying attention to every word. The diner has good pie, Ethan said. I haven't had the pie. You should. A silence. And in that silence, something was decided, not loudly, not with ceremony, but with the quiet finality of things that settle into place when the conditions are finally right, the way a joint fits when the parts have been machined correctly. The way an engine sounds when everything that was broken has been fixed and the ignition turns and the cylinders find their rhythm and the whole thing comes alive. "Are you still in Harwick?" she asked. "Until about noon." "I'll come to the diner," she said. If that works." "That works," he said. He hung up. He looked at his phone for a moment. Then he looked up at Marcus, who was examining the middle distance with elaborate casualness. "Not a word," Ethan said. "I didn't say anything," Marcus said. "You were thinking loudly. A man's thoughts are his own." Lily had finished writing her name in the frost and had moved on to something else, a shape that might have been a house, or possibly a boat. She looked up at her father with the expression she wore when she had decided something. "Is she coming?" Lily asked. He looked at his daughter. He shook his head slowly. "Were you listening to my phone call?" "No," Lily said with the complete serenity of a 4-year-old who has been listening to every word. "She's coming to the diner," he said. Lily nodded, deeply satisfied, and turned back to her frost art. Marcus looked at the sky. "Interesting morning," he observed. "Shut up, Marcus," Ethan said, and the older man laughed, and the sound of it went out into the cold morning air and disappeared, and the November clouds continued their slow separation above Harwick, and the light between them grew a little stronger, a little more certain of itself. They met at the diner at 11. Victoria was already there, same booth by the window, though she could not have known it was the same one. She had a coffee and had already eaten, and she looked up when they came through the door with an expression that was doing several things at once. There was composure, as always. There was the effort of composure, and behind both of those something unguarded, a brightness that she had not been fully able to tamp down before they walked in, or perhaps had decided not to try. Lily went directly to the booth and climbed in beside her. Victoria looked down at the 4-year-old who had installed herself against her side with the confidence of someone who had already decided this was appropriate. "Good morning," Lily said. "Good morning," Victoria said. Ethan sat across from them. He looked at the two of them side by side, the small girl with her wild morning hair and her utter certainty, the composed woman in the expensive coat who was visibly, thoroughly undone by the proximity of a 4-year-old who had decided to like her, and he felt something move in his chest that he was not entirely prepared for. It was not a clean feeling. Nothing true ever is. It was threaded through with all the complications of what it would mean to let something like this begin. The logistics, the distances, the practical impossibility of two people from positions as different as theirs finding common ground. It was threaded through with the memory of the last time he had let someone in, and what that had eventually cost him and his daughter both. It was threaded through with the knowledge that Lily was watching everything and learning from everything, and that whatever he did in front of her was part of what she would understand the world to be. All of that. And underneath all of that, the simple, unambiguous warmth of sitting across from someone he had known for less than 18 hours and feeling, with the directness that comes from having learned to pay attention to the things that matter. This is a real person. This is someone who stopped on a highway in the rain. This is someone who ate a patty melt in a diner and looked surprised that it was good. This is someone who called a man she barely knew because it felt dishonest not to tell him what she'd learned. The waitress appeared. "Pancakes?" she asked Lily. "Yes, please," Lily said. She looked at Victoria. "And you, hun?" Victoria looked at the menu. She looked at Lily. She looked across the table at Ethan with an expression that was entirely unguarded now. All the careful architecture of her composure set aside. Just for this moment, in this diner, in a town she had not intended to stay in, at a table she had not expected to be glad to be at. "Pancakes," she said. "Please." And the morning, which had been gray and cold and full of practical problems, began to become something else entirely. Ethan Cole had not come to Harwick looking for anything. He had come because his truck broke down in the rain and his daughter was cold and the world had put him exactly where he was and given him no say in the matter. That was how most of the important things in his life had arrived. Not sought, not planned, not arriving in the order or the form he would have chosen. They had arrived the way weather arrives. Undeniable. Requiring a response. And the man you are is the man revealed by how you respond. He had responded by pulling to the shoulder and assessing the damage with clear eyes. He had responded by keeping his daughter warm and his fear to himself. He had responded by accepting help without diminishment and offering honesty without performance. He had no idea what came next. He had, for the first time in a long time, an awareness of wanting to find out. Outside the diner window, the clouds had parted entirely now, and the November sun, pale, low, honest about how much warmth it could offer at this time of year, but offering it nonetheless, had arrived over Harwick and was turning the wet main street into something close to beautiful. Lily pointed at it. "Daddy," she said. "The clouds went home." "They did," he said. She looked at Victoria. "Now the stars can come out later." Victoria looked at the little girl beside her. Something in her face did the thing that Ethan had been watching it approach, had been watching from the moment she'd heard "Are you a princess?" in this same booth 12 hours ago, and it finally arrived. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It was just the thing beneath the armor, surfacing, because the armor had gotten heavier than was worth carrying. She smiled. Not the social smile of charity events and ribbon cuttings, not the controlled expression of a woman who has learned to present herself to a world that is always watching. A real smile, the kind that starts somewhere in the chest and arrives on the face without permission, the kind that surprises the person producing it almost as much as the person receiving it. Lily, who had been watching for this with the patience of a child who has decided something is going to happen and is simply waiting for the evidence, looked extremely satisfied. Ethan looked at his coffee. He was smiling too. He tried to keep it modest and mostly failed, and decided he didn't particularly care. 6 weeks later, Ethan Cole was standing in his shop in Claremont at 7:30 in the morning, with a cup of coffee in one hand and an invoice in the other, when the black SUV pulled into the lot. He saw it through the window, set the invoice down, took a sip of coffee, went to the door. She was already getting out by the time he reached it. She was wearing a coat he hadn't seen before, still expensive but less formal than the one from the highway, something that suggested she had, at some point in the past 6 weeks, gone into a store and bought something without calculating the impression it would make. She had a paper bag in one hand and was squinting against the morning sun with an expression of mild determination that he had learned was how she looked when she was in the middle of deciding to do something she had already decided to do. He leaned in the doorway and watched her cross the lot. "You drove 3 hours," he said. 2.5, she said. The highway was clear. "For coffee?" He nodded at the paper bag. "The coffee is from the place in Ashfield I told you about." She handed him the bag. "The other thing is also from Ashfield." He looked in the bag. There was a coffee and there was a small wrapped package that turned out to be a book, a paperback worn at the corners, the kind of copy that had been read more than once by someone who kept returning to it. He turned it over. It was a book about a man who builds something with his hands in a place where everyone has told him it can't be built. He looked at the cover for a moment and then looked at her. "You drove 3 hours to bring me a book," he said. 2.5, she said again. "And I had a meeting in Franklin that I moved to Monday." "You moved a meeting." "It wasn't a critical meeting." He looked at her. She was holding his gaze with the direct steadiness that she had arrived at. Over the past 6 weeks, through a process that he had watched with the attention he brought to everything that mattered to him, a gradual and deliberate lowering of the apparatus of distance. Not quickly, not without setbacks. She was not a person who made herself available easily, and he had not pushed and had not performed and had not tried to manage the pace of it. He had just been where he was, which was here in his shop, fixing what needed to be fixed and being honest about what he didn't know how to fix. And she had kept finding reasons to call, and then to drive. "Is Lily coming this weekend?" Victoria asked. "Saturday to Sunday." "I thought—" She looked at the shop, at the lot, at the tools visible through the open bay door. "I thought I could stay. In Claremont. If there's somewhere—" "The Maple Inn is clean," he said. "You've said that before." "It's still true." She looked at him with the expression that preceded these days, the thing he had first seen in the diner when Lily rendered her verdict, the thing that arrived before she smiled. The moment of allowing. He had come to recognize it the way you recognize the particular sound of an engine about to find its rhythm. "Okay," she said. "Okay." He stood back from the doorway. She stepped inside the shop, which was warm and smelled of oil and metal and coffee, and she looked around at it with the focused curiosity she brought to his world every time she encountered some new part of it. Not condescension, not tourism, but the genuine attention of a person learning something they had decided was worth learning. He watched her look at the photographs on the wall by the register. There were 6 of them. His parents on their wedding day. His unit in Kandahar. 12 men in the flat brown light. Squinting. Marcus at the shop opening 8 years ago, holding a wrench and looking immensely pleased. Lily at 2, at 3, at 4, each photograph slightly blurred because she rarely held still. And one other, a photograph he had added to the wall 6 months ago, after finding it in the box in the closet, under the winter coats. It was from the Claremont Gazette, 2014. A photograph taken at Fort Bragg at the ceremony. He was in dress uniform, standing straight, and his expression was the expression of a man who has done something that cost him more than he expected, and is not sure how to carry the accounting of it. The commanding officer was pinning the decoration to his chest. In the background, barely visible, his mother was in the front row of chairs, with her hand pressed flat against her sternum. Victoria looked at it for a long time. "When did you put that up?" she asked. "June," he said. "Why June?" He considered. "Lily asked me what I did in the army. She's at the age where she's asking about everything. I told her some of it, the parts that are hers to know, and then I thought—" He paused. "I thought it was time to stop keeping it behind the coats." She turned from the photograph and looked at him. "The 4th man," she said. It wasn't a question. "Daniel," he said. She waited. "You carry a thing like that in 2 directions at once," he said. "What you did, what you didn't manage to do, and for a long time the second part is louder, but somewhere along the way—" He stopped. He looked at the photograph. "You have to let both of them be true at the same time. Otherwise the thing just sits there and grows weight." She was very still. He had come to understand that this was how she listened, with her whole body, without filling the space. "You went back for him," she said. "Yes." Knowing it was, "Yes. That's—" She stopped. He watched her choose, the way he always watched her choose. The precision of it. The care. "That's who you are," she said finally. "Isn't it? That's the whole thing." He looked at her for a moment. "What do you mean?" "The truck," she said. "Lily, the shop, the way you sit in a room, the way you talk to her, the way you—" She made a small movement with one hand, dismissive of the inadequacy of language. "You went back into a burning vehicle for a man you knew you probably couldn't save, because leaving wasn't something you were capable of. And you've been doing that your whole life, not with vehicles, with everything." The shop was quiet around them. The morning light came through the windows of the bay door in long, pale rectangles. And somewhere on the street outside a dog was barking at something, and the coffee in his hand was cooling. And Ethan Cole stood in the middle of everything he had built with his hands and his years, and his refusal to become anything other than what he was. And he looked at the woman who had stopped her car in the rain for no reason she could name and had been stopping, in one way or another ever since. "You're saying a lot for this early in the morning," he said. She looked at him. The thing happened. The moment before the smile. The allowing of it. "You brought it up." "I did not bring it up." "You looked at the photograph. You put the photograph on the wall." "That's fair," he admitted. She smiled. The real one. The one that started somewhere in her chest and arrived without permission. He had seen it more frequently in the past 6 weeks, and every time it arrived he had the same thought, which was that he could not imagine what her life had been like before she learned to let it out, and that he intended in whatever way he could to be the kind of presence that made it easier for her to produce. That was a commitment he had not put into words, even to himself, until this moment. He looked at the coffee she had brought him. He looked at the book. He looked at the woman who had driven 2.5 hours on a clear highway on a Friday morning to bring them to him, and who was standing in his shop in her new coat with the sun from the bay windows on her face and the careful composure, finally, fully at rest. "You're staying the weekend," he said. "If there's room." "There's room." She nodded. Something in her settled. The last held thing releasing, the last resistance to the direction this had been moving since a broken engine on Highway 9 in the rain. He recognized the sound of it. He was a mechanic. He knew what it felt like when the last resistant piece finally fits. Saturday came with cold sunlight and no apology. Lily arrived at 2 in the afternoon, delivered by her mother's car at the end of the driveway with the ritual efficiency of a custody exchange. She bounded across the yard toward Ethan with the joyful directness of a child who has been looking forward to something and has not had the patience seriously tested yet today. She stopped when she saw Victoria on the porch. She looked at her father. She looked at Victoria. She looked at her father again with an expression of very serious appraisal. "Is she staying?" Lily asked. "For the weekend," Ethan said. Lily considered this. Then she walked up the porch steps and stopped in front of Victoria, who had gone very still in the way she went still when something required genuine composure to manage, and looked up at her with the absolute directness of the 4-year-old who had named her a princess in a diner booth 6 weeks ago. "Good," Lily said. "I wanted to show you my drawings." Victoria looked at this small, certain person. She looked at Ethan, who was watching from the bottom of the steps with the expression he wore when his daughter did something that got past all his armor without even trying. "I'd like to see them," Victoria said. Lily took her hand. Not tentatively, not with the careful politeness of children who are unsure of their welcome. She took Victoria's hand with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone completing a circuit, linking what should be linked, connecting what the world had apparently already decided belonged together. Victoria looked down at the small hand in hers. Her face did the thing, the full thing, unguarded, undeniable, the smile that arrived without permission and stayed without effort. She looked up at Ethan with something in her eyes that was beyond the smile, something that had been building for 6 weeks from the first moment she had pulled over on a dark highway, because she had seen a little girl in a truck window and decided that leaving wasn't something she was capable of. He came up the porch steps. He stood beside her, and the three of them were there together in the cold Saturday sunlight on the porch of a mechanic's house in Claremont, and there was nothing remarkable about it except everything. "Daddy," Lily said, still holding Victoria's hand, turning toward the door. "I have a new drawing. It's of all three of us." He looked at his daughter. He looked at Victoria. He looked at the drawing of a girl who had decided, with the authority of pure certainty, what the shape of the family around her was going to be. "Let's see it," he said. And they went inside, out of the cold, into the warmth of a house that had been waiting, longer than Ethan had allowed himself to notice, to hold more than one person's life. The door closed behind them. Outside, the November light stayed a while longer on the empty porch, on the 2 chairs that sat side by side on the frost beginning to form at the edges of the steps, on the driveway where 3 different lives had arrived from 3 different directions and found, in the ordinary geography of a Saturday afternoon, the place where they were supposed to be. There are moments in a man's life when the road he has been walking, the one he built with his own hands, with his own endurance, with the quiet and invisible labor of simply refusing to stop, arrives somewhere he did not expect. Not a destination he planned, not a reward he calculated. Just a place that is, against all odds and all the miles that came before it. Exactly right. Ethan Cole had driven through a storm and come out the other side. He had not arrived here by asking for anything, by performing anything, by being anything other than what he was, a man who worked with his hands, loved his daughter without condition, carried his losses without display, and kept going the way men keep going when they have decided that the people depending on them are worth every mile of the road it takes to reach them. That was the whole of it. That was enough. That was more than enough.